Three, two, one. Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric. I'm back here with Matt. Matt was here last week, and we kind of connected over work, essentially. He works in the military as well. And he was here last week talking a little bit about his story. And we have a lot of some of the things we differ on, but we have a lot of the same views, and we wanted to start doing this weekly. But last week, I kind of teased the fact that Matt's getting out of the military. And I know there's some people who have served who watch my channel and people who have thought about serving. And I've talked all about my opinion, but I wanted to get Matt's kind of story about why he's getting out of the military, what his experience was, and then advice that he can give. So thanks for coming back on, Matt.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's get started with, we chatted kind of offline about why you joined. You're an immigrant from South Africa. You talked about your service, but I don't want to speak for you. Why did you join the military?
So this is a pretty long story. I hope you got some time, and I'm a bit of a talker. So just interject and interrupt me when and where you need.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm an immigrant, came to the States in 96, became a citizen in 2005. At that time, I took an oath of citizenship, which, among other things, I took an oath to defend the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Over time, and after lots of faulting or disqualifications by my peers in college, telling me that I'm a privileged white man, which I guess I am, my opinion is disqualified. I was like, no, that's crap, man. I'm an immigrant. We came to this country with nothing, with a few suitcases. I know what it's like to live a life where you buy some furniture and then you use the box from that furniture to make additional furniture because you don't have money to have furniture in your house, Now, we were never super down and out, living under bridges and things like that. All things considered, we've had a very charmed, well-off and privileged life. So I don't want to argue that. But these folks telling me that I had no right to my opinion because I was a white man, I vehemently disagreed with that. And that I saw in those opinions and those people treating me that way, that there was a sickness in America. And I was like, well, I took this oath of citizenship where I'm supposed to protect the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as an immigrant, obviously, I had to study what it means to be a citizen. I had to take a test, I had to be fingerprinted. And it's a big deal for me to be a citizen. It's a massive privilege. We came from a country that was worse off or getting worse off to a country that is better off. That's why immigrants come to America, because it's better than where they were. And America might not have it all sorted out, but like my dad and his friend says, America might suck, but it sucks the least. So I'm pretty passionate about being an American and being a citizen and fulfilling my oath. 1 second. So that led me to go, well, if I have this opinion, I should probably be consistent and serve my country in some capacity. And what better way to serve my country than in the military? There are other options, but I've always been passionate. And, there's that thing, I was a typical teenager. And when the recruiters would come to high school, especially right after 9/11, and ask if you want to join, I'm like, no, I've got authority issues. And I'm going to go to boot camp and I'll get kicked out and blah, 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 knowing nothing about how the military works and that they strive on those folks, right? They want you to go in saying, I've got authority issues. Because go ahead and say it to a drill instructor or an MTI's face, right?
Right.
See where that gets you. So typical hot-headed kid, and I made excuses. And then much later at age 33, I was like, well, I need to rectify this. I need to put in my time. And so I enlisted, went into BMT, and I was all gung-ho, and I'd been listening to podcasts and all these videos and listening to the Black Rifle guys. I watched the entire rise of Black Rifle Coffee Company, which is pretty amazing. And those guys told all these stories of special forces and operators and like all of this high-speed stuff. And I was like, well, I'm 33. I'm not going to do that. But I do want to put in my time. And I'm passionate about mechanic stuff. Anything with wheels, dude, from like a unicycle to a car, motorcycles, airplanes, bicycle, whatever. If it's got wheels, I like it. So I'm going to mess with it. And that passion led me eventually to the Colorado Air Guard. There's this other side of this that I should, let's back up for just a second. Going back to like that foundation principle thing, right? In becoming a citizen, obviously I read the Declaration of Independence, which is the promise of individual liberty to each of the people inside of the United States. And then the Constitution, which is the manual on how to run the government to deliver on that promise. And then the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which I consider the citizen's task. We earn our citizenship, each one of us, every day by living out the Bill of Rights. The first 2 amendments being the most important. The first one being the First Amendment, freedom of speech and access to information so that we can make the proper decisions on how we vote, how we share opinions and information and so on and such forth. And the second, which gives the first teeth, being physically fit, owning firearms or weapons that we can use to defend ourselves, our families, our neighbors, and our friends against any sort of oppression. It was written for the government, but any sort of oppression, right? And so this is my understanding going into enlistment. And so I do a lot of research on the Second Amendment, and I find out that not only did the Founding Fathers put the Second Amendment into the Bill of Rights, they subsequently wrote militia funding laws. So there's the Militia Act, and I forgot the exact date, but it's late 1700s, like 1793. And then there's another Militia Act in the late 1800s, maybe 1886. We'll have to verify that. Don't quote me, and please don't crucify me. But they're right around that time. And those Militia Acts not allotted money for resources for citizen soldiers to join the militia and be provided with the tools to be on parity for any possible tyrannical or coup-like behavior, right? If the military was used against the citizens. And then the last one of those is the Militia Act of 1903. So throughout these like 200 years, the Founding Fathers kept going back with requiring certain members to serve on the militia and then pulling it back, saying it should be a volunteer thing. But the current Militia Act is the Militia Act of 1903, and that is what authorizes money for official state militias. Because remember, the 10th Amendment gives states rights, or rather guarantees state rights that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. So the Second Amendment leans on the 10th Amendment, and these rights aren't privileges given to you by the Constitution. They are rights that the Bill of Rights enumerates that you have anyway. So the states are allowed to have their own individual militias separate from the federal military, and the Militia Act of 1903 provides funding for those militias to exist.
From the federal government.
Right. And
correct.
Yeah, and also to allow states to fund their militias. So you can have money coming from different pots, right? We know it is Title 10 from the feds and Title 32 from the states, but it kind of writes out how all of that gets portioned out. And the reason...
So sorry to interrupt. So you're kind of enumerating why you joined the Guard over active duty when you're talking through this. Okay.
So as a citizen who took this oath to defend the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, knowing all of these steps, right, and studying the history, I come to the point of I want to serve in the military, but I don't necessarily support the military industrial complex. So I would like to serve in an official militia for the states.
Can you define what your opinion, when you say military industrial complex, what do you specifically mean by that?
As I have come to understand it, it's like nation building. So essentially piggybacking or using a conflict with a legitimate reason to make a lot of money for various defense contractors.
And politicians and the like who invest
right.
in those. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't want to go fight a war to make somebody else rich. I want to defend U.S. citizens. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I certainly don't want to attack anybody, especially not for monetary gain. And the Second Amendment was written as including everything up unto defense. It does not provide for offense at all. So I thought an official militia, which is either Army Guard or Air Guard, and through various influences in my life, friends and family, I ended up going, those are all personal reasons, so I'm just going to skip over those and go directly into the Guard. We should pause, however, real quick and explain to those who have not enlisted how the military is structured.
Yeah. So if you've seen before, everyone's seen this on the news, because it's considered martial law to some degree, legally speaking. If federal troops come in and they're patrolling your streets, and yet you see it all the time. We're going to deploy the National Guard. They wear the same uniform. They did this in DC after Jan 6. They do this for natural disasters. So they wear the same uniform. We're both in the Guard, Matt and I. And I'm formerly active duty, but they wear the same uniform. However, the pots of money in legality, you fall under the governor of the state rather than the president, unless you can get activated and go to Title 10, which would be federal service. So your boss changes to the president, but your first boss in the Guard is your governor, not the president.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the law that delineates that is called the Posse Comitatus Act. And that essentially, remember, Declaration of Independence, individual liberty. So a monarch or a dictator shouldn't get to use the military to oppress the citizens of a country. And so the Posse Comitatus Act was written and signed into law. And now that means that you have all of these capable people in the federal military, in the Army and the Navy, that could render aid, but they could, if they're allowed to render aid, then they could also be allowed to oppress. So federal military isn't allowed to do that stuff. The National Guards have to do that. Also, let's just real quick cover that there's like federal, and then there's many branches up there. Navy, Coast Guard, Army, Space Force, all of those guys. And then there are the militias, and they each have a reserve, or rather, the Guards and Federal Reserve units are both reserve components of federal military, right? So they're trained to the same standards, trained to do the same job, but with different, like you said, legalities and funding. Okay, so where was I? Going into the Guard. Right, so I was under the assumption that I would be serving Coloradans, but I did not really understand that the Guard was a reserve component. Along with that, well, that's a personal reason, and I don't want to get into that. Give me a moment. Yeah, so going to the Guard, and I was all gung-ho and ready to rock and roll, having listened to the Black Rifle Coffee guys and Special Forces and like all of those stories. But I was 33, I was a nerd. I wasn't particularly fit or physically capable. And I really liked machines. So I was like, you know what? I can be an aircraft mechanic. It's not glamorous. It's not great, but it is a necessary function. And I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it. And then the moment I walked into BMT, I was...
That's basic military training.
Thank you.
That. Yeah.
Air Force's version of basic, right? I was disappointed. we spent more time focusing on, I don't know if we want to classify it as like woke stuff, but essentially interpersonal communication, emotions, all of these things that I think don't really have a place in the military, shouldn't have a place in the military. Like, your feelings don't count, bro. We do war, or we're preparing and training to do war. Like,
what year was this?
2019.
2019. Okay.
And they even had a limit on how many physical exercises they could have us do during the day as disciplinary actions. They called them tools. And you could only do 3 sets of 20 tools a day. You could do more on your own, right? But the MTIs, the military training instructors, or drill sergeants in Army speak, couldn't like make you push, and they couldn't do shark attacks with like 3 or 4 of them get up in your face and yell at you and like make you resilient, because there's this focus on the military has lots of acronyms for it, but essentially all of this emotional stuff. I understand why they had the focus on it, because they had those scandals in, what was it, 2013, where, or was it 2007? No, I can't remember, where leaders, MTIs, drill instructors, were abusing their authority and doing terrible things with trainees, sexual abuse and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, those things have to be addressed. That's not okay or acceptable anywhere ever in the world, right? But I think that the focus was excessive. It was like a 5-to-1 ratio of emotional stuff or emotional briefings versus military knowledge training. So, I mean, just memorizing like the rank structure, for instance, or getting physically fit, getting enough sleep. Like, these are all things that I appreciate, but it made BMT really easy. I left there going, I don't think I accomplished much. And then go into tech school, which is the Air Force version of AIT, where you learn how to do your job. The Army's AIT. It was kind of similar. Like, kids were just, shoot, man, there were 2 or 3 guys that brought home a keg into the dorms one weekend. And then everybody got in trouble. The entire squadron got in trouble. And everybody paid for that, but we didn't find out who it was or like what was going on. And
well, so going back to your experience, sorry, my phone. How much of that, you said you joined at 33? How much of your experience in basic training do you think was because you were 33 and had some life experience versus your average 18-year-old who doesn't have any, and it's a huge stress inoculation to being by yourself? So how much of that, because some of the stories you're telling me, it's definitely different. I've been in 16 years now, definitely different than when I went through basic, but I know older guys have it a little easier because it, or at least their experience in life exists. So when they get there, it's not as big of a culture shock because they've had some life experience.
yeah, I guess there is that. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like the initial week or 2 was terrifying because you didn't know. And because you didn't know, every new thing was something to react to. But once you like figured it out and you kind of figured where the limits were and you knew how it was going to go, then it was just like a survival game. Maybe it was easier, but you know, this kind of harped on a feeling and an idea that I'd experienced way before the military was even a thing. The schools, or rather, starting with the school system, that is one of the easiest examples I can provide. I remember coming to America, getting into the schools and being held back 1 year so that I could learn the language. because English is my second language. And so
What do
I
they
guess,
speak in South Africa?
well, officially the country has 11 national languages. When I was born, there were 2, English and Afrikaans. And so I grew up speaking Afrikaans.
Hmm.
Went to some English classes prior to coming to the States, but I think I actually remembered maybe 5 words and didn't really understand anything else. So supposed to go into 6th grade. They put me into 5th grade so I could, learn the language, and I did. And I think that I was maybe predestined to being in America because I was in special ed in South Africa for language. I could not spell Afrikaans to save my life. And I was the best speller in my class by 6th grade, so within 1 year. English just makes sense to me. It always has. So I don't know if that was like a destiny thing or what, but anyway, the schools, the classes, the requirements, the tests were, I thought, excessively easy. Maybe that's a remnant from like the British school system, which was quite hard and had a lot of discipline involved. I mean, shoot, dude, in elementary school, I got spanked in school, like by a teacher, not even the principal.
In South Africa?
Yeah. So
yeah, we're pretty far from that now.
So coming here, and you could mouth off, you could talk back to the teacher, you wouldn't get physically disciplined, you wouldn't even get yelled at, and the requirements for having your homework done and not performing academically were non-existent. So the bar was set pretty low. So these 18-year-olds going into the military, they're pretty soft as is. And it definitely shows in BMT because that doesn't get much harder either. I think the standard is pretty low. I think it used to be fairly high. Maybe it's going back up. I don't know.
Have you seen any of those like old retro, like 1950s PE class videos from the United States? Just do like
making
chin
the
ups.
rounds on Instagram, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like everyone has a 6-pack.
Yeah.
Not all like super jacked, but they're thin and kind of very strong.
And capable.
Yeah. 1950. So what do you think, with that experience that you had coming here, what grade were you in? You 5th grade, did you say? When you immigrated?
To go into 6th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you came to the United States, you decided to join the military. You're expecting something a little bit more difficult
and
intense. So why do you think? Now, I always ask, people have a perspective like it should be this way. Now, why do you think it should be more difficult than it is? Because, since joining, you've had an experience, right, in the military, and we're going to get into what your experience has been, but difficult for difficult sake doesn't make a lot of sense. And I used this analogy the other day, like people in the military, there's a lot of dumb rules, or at least on paper, they seem dumb, whether it's like the number of or how ribbons are supposed to be orchestrated and how your uniform's supposed to look. It's very detail oriented. And Bill Belichick, the coach of the Patriots, is famous for having a lot of stupid, idiosyncratic rules in his organization. Mm-hmm. And new players would come, and they tend to, even though they might think they're dumb, they respect the rules. Why do they do that? Because they know he's a winner. He wins. So there's a method to the madness, they think.
Exactly.
When that starts to not make sense is when the organization itself and all the idiosyncratic rules is a failing organization. They don't win wars. Maybe they don't produce the best of the best anymore. And then you start to question, maybe it's not the rule, it's the people or whatnot. So what's your take on that? Like when you say your experience was, it was kind of soft. Do you think the difficulty or the culture shock, if you will, of basic training, or the lack thereof now, is producing different quality of people?
Yeah, of course. And I have no other explanation other than what we talked about last time, which is this woke culture having oozed its way into every level of government and bureaucracy.
So how do you define woke? When you say woke, what do you mean by that?
Essentially, in a nutshell, as we discussed last time, critical theory, outcome-based reasoning rather than logic-based reasoning, where you don't care what the inputs are, you don't care what the premises are, you don't care what the current system is, and try to change that current system. You try to burn it all down to just get to the outcome that you desire as fast as possible. That's kind of how I see woke.
Yeah, and if we're looking at like, and one thing I like to remind people, if we're talking about the number of librarians, like if it's we have this many males and we're trying to get to an equitable number, the consequences of that don't matter. But there's certain jobs, military being one of them, where if equity in the outcome in the number of represented parties doesn't equal what you want it to, therefore you have to lower the standard. And that's what you're seeing in the military now. Like if you're
in
seeing
US
that
culture.
correct. But in the military
Yeah.
specifically, firefighter, police is another one. Jobs where it's physical, or it's not arbitrary. It's like it's not necessarily sitting at a desk. It's how to fly an airplane, a fast burning airplane like a jet. That's going to cost millions of dollars in damages and safety and yada yada. And if at the end of the day, it means you lose a war.
Right.
Because if you don't have people who know what they're doing, it's going to cost people's lives, unfortunately.
Well,
So you're kind of playing games with that.
Yeah, and you're also losing people, and you're losing the culture, right? Like, I mean, shoot, well, we can go 100 different ways, but essentially, I'm going to try to stick on topic here. Coming back to that previous episode that we did and those foundational principles that we talked about, I can't find another explanation. Now, if there's one out there, please send it to me and I'd be happy to look at it. But I can't find another explanation other than the Russians knew that they couldn't win the Cold War, so they started a 100-year misinformation campaign, planting professors to teach people critical theory, out-based reasoning, which generation after generation, we're probably 3 or 4 generations deep now, get folks to look at things not critically, not logically. They don't evaluate them. And so they start paying more attention to their emotions, their feelings, and to the system that's influencing their feelings. It's the JFK thing, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? And the reason that is important and makes sense to me is because being an American means being independent. It's we the people. We, each person, have the responsibility to do our part to be a nation. That starts with physical fitness, right? If your body isn't capable, you're not strong, you don't have endurance, you can't interface with reality in any meaningful sort of way. The next step is mentally fit. That First Amendment part, right? Have access to information, read your history, know why and where we do things, understand the premises and the logic. Understand Western civilization, that we came from the Greeks, and the logic that Greeks figured out, the discipline of logic, and discovering the truth through mental exercises and various mental tools within the logical framework. That influenced us 2,500 years ago. Stoicism and the idea of self-improvement, that came about during the Greeks 2,500 years ago, right? That's the bedrock of Western civilization. And most Americans don't know that. But the idea of thinking logically and self-improvement fuels personal responsibility, independence, and capability. I mean, how many people do you think today could change their own tire if they had a flat on the side of the road?
10%.
There you go. How many people could know where the master electrical panel is for their house? So if a circuit breaker trips, they can go reset.
30.
And last one, how many people do you think know how to fix the flapper on a toilet tank?
I just had to do that this morning. Yeah, I'd say maybe 20%. Yeah. Low.
So we the people aren't we the people anymore. That's why we have a divide. That's why we have a problem. This focus on emotions is, I'm sorry, let me back up. The military is supposed to be the pinnacle of the best of the best to defend the rest, right? So
where do you get that from, though? Because I don't like the military has never been
propaganda.
Like during Vietnam, we wanted to not recruit college bound / college registered males because we didn't want there to be a bunch of dummies
Right.
in this country. Like that, we didn't want non-college graduates just running the country or running about. So we wanted to keep the educated alive and kill the non-educated, or at least draft them.
Right. And that makes sense. But you don't need to be a genius. You just need to be the best. You don't need to be super smart to be the best. All you need to do is know how to do your job. Focus on your job.
The best,
and do your job, right?
Yeah.
So if we have the military as a reflection, as I think probably the most accurate reflection, maybe an over-representation of the average American, because the military pulls from everywhere. There are people that have very difficult lives that come into the military. There are people with very good lives that come into the military, and they're all mixed. And it's supposed to be a meritocracy, and everybody's supposed to be treated the same, right? And provided the same opportunities to level up, right? To promote, to learn, to grow. So if we use the military as a representation, then the country's pretty sick. People they don't have the principles and the values of individual liberty, that understand that there's an inherent self-limit to freedom, that understand that there's a personal responsibility associated to that, and they're just not living that up. And so they can easily be manipulated into two political parties and set against one another. And you can see that in the military as well. You have those who just want to do the bare minimum to get the job done, and those who want to strive to do more and live up to the fundamental values, right? The three core values of the Air Force is integrity first, service before self, and oh God, this is embarrassing. What's the third one?
Excellence in all we do.
There you go. So service before self, that shouldn't be an Air Force core value. That should be an American citizen core value. Excellence in all we do. If you're going to spend the time to do something and you're not going to do it to the best of your ability, why are you wasting your time? Coming back to the principles of resource management, time, money, and calories. If you're going to spend those calories half-assing something, you've just wasted them. You've literally just flushed them down the toilet, right? It's like buying something cheap off of Amazon. I call it Chinesium because it's usually made in China and it's usually throwaway, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to use that thing 3 or 4 times and it's going to break by design so that you can buy more. Or you can save 5, 6, or 10 times the amount of money, buy the same thing US made, and pass it on to your kids, right? So buy once, cry once, I think is the saying. And integrity first integrity to yourself first. How can I look you in the eye, or myself in the mirror, or somebody else in the eye and know that I'm a liar and a fraud, and that that's okay because it makes me feel good. Because people are paying attention and worrying about how I feel. My feelings don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. Nobody's feelings matter when it comes to getting the job done. Feelings matter at the end of the day after the job is done. Because in doing the job, through excellence in what we do, and doing it to the best of our ability, and going through the challenges to get that job done, let me back up. Getting the job done and feeling good about it, that accomplishment of getting that job well done, that is what fuels me, right? That makes me feel good. That addresses my emotions. And going through the challenges of getting that job done, especially when it is hard, that builds resilience to make me reflect back and say, oh, well, in the moment, I was really angry at this person because they weren't doing that, or at this person because they weren't following the procedures or the process, or they were cutting corners or whatever, right? But working through that frustration, that builds the resilience. It also builds the team. That addresses my emotions in the form of mental health by making me stronger. Woke culture is easy to blame the system for the individual's experience, but they don't place any responsibility on the individual to harden up.
So do you think woke, I have a couple questions for you. Do you think woke culture is just coming why do you think some people identify with it? Because it's hard to sell communism, for instance, when you're doing well, when people are thriving, there's a thriving middle class, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to be like, hey, you know, this awesome life you have, wouldn't it be better if I took all your stuff and redistributed it? So we have a lot of young people specifically that are, I would say, misdirecting certain frustrations and identifying with woke culture because it kind of gives them a reason why the system is the way it is. I don't think it gives them the correct reason, but it gives them a reason so they can identify with it. So I think, yeah, I'll stop there. What's your take on that? Like, do you think that they have a point for their frustration?
No, they were coddled and they were told, they were taught that it's not your fault, it's the system's fault, right? They weren't taught from a young age personal responsibility and agency. And like Jocko says, discipline is freedom. It doesn't matter how bad your situation is. If you own it, you exert agency over it so you can change it. If you don't own it, and you give control to the system, or you give control to a bad dad that was abusive, or that wasn't there, or a mom that was an alcoholic or a drug user, and you say that I can't be successful because of this reason, whatever, fill in the blank, this reason, you've just given your agency away. You've just given your ability to change your situation away. The only thing that you have left is to be a victim.
That's interesting because that's one of the things that I've gotten kind of frustrated about talking about economic news is I distinctly remember growing up, and a lot of people in my grandparents' generation, they'd watch Fox News, they shake their fist at the TV, and I was like, all this does is tick you off. But as I've been talking about all these problems, my main goal is to kind of educate people and then give them agency, hopefully, because a lot of people don't even understand the system itself and like why it's broken. So they see some of the symptoms of the system breaking, and they think, well, maybe if I vote in this or that or this or that, the system will change. And that's what I'm trying to do, give them agency. But at the end of the day, I think what you're saying is, like, you can be dealt a bad hand, but your choice to own it is to play the hand you're dealt or to complain about it, which would make the problem worse. And so we are dealt a hand here in America at this time in history. And I think we have an opportunity because people are so, I would say, disenfranchised, both in the, talking about the military. There's a lot of people in the military who are let's just say, don't want to serve anymore for a lot of reasons. And then people in society who think everything that America has ever done has led to this inequality, etc. And they're angry at the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And they think if somebody else could fix it for them, then it'll all be okay. And I agree with you. I think owning your circle of influence, think globally, act locally, I think you said that last time. And then how can you be the change and that spreads out, that butterfly effect of changing society. But I wanted to real quick get back to the military. When you say core values, when we were talking about Bill Belichick and how he does things, what I'm experiencing in the military is when you say things, when you have mottos, right? All these organizations, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, all that, they have mottos and they try to live up to them. But if the head shed, the guys in charge, and as they cycle through, they don't have integrity for a service for self and in excellence in all we do, it starts to become this hokey phrase, right? You're not part of an organization, you're part of a political organization. And that's what I see kind of happening in the military, because one of my big contentions is people join for one of two reasons. There's downstream reasons, but it's financial or patriotic, right? So they didn't know what they wanted to do and they're trying to graduate college or whatnot. That's the financial reason. That one's going away slowly because you can get free college from Starbucks and all these other places. And college isn't what it used to be. And then we are left with patriotic, which is the people you really want to recruit, because they're the ones who will do the right thing, hopefully, for patriotic reasons. Because at the end of the day, if you have a bunch of non-patriots, people who don't have any loyalty to anything other than a paycheck, you've got a militia, kind of, right? It's not people who are patriotic. Yeah. So you got a gun for hire, essentially.
Mercenary, I think, is better.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah, mercenary. So what's your take on that? Like the fact that the lines you were given, the like hoorah speech about what the military is, and your experience since joining in 2019, obviously you're getting out, so there's a reason for that. So what has that experience been? And then not just at your, and you don't have to get in specifics at your unit, but military as a whole, you've seen over the last 4 years, what are some things that you would say, this is the wrong path?
Yeah. It's a little unfair. Well, first, let me clear something up. I'm not really getting out because there's a problem in the military. Because as a person who lives by the idea of agency, if something is wrong, I should stay and fix it, right? So
I sometimes, by the way, disagree. Like one caveat I give to that, like if the building's on fire, but there becomes a point where you can't put the fire out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. That's why we have fire drills.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're to that point yet. Let me just say that. Maybe I haven't been in long enough to be jaded. But when I went in initially, the whole point was to serve a term. I noticed, as I shared before, with the school stuff, that life is just soft in America. And then when these folks in college started hammering on me, I was like, no, you have no right. You have not taken an oath. You have not had to learn a new language. You haven't studied any of this stuff or had to take a test. You have no right to critique me or tell me that I am wrong. I have done more to be here than you have. You are a silver spoon American. You are entitled. So, to further that train of thinking, I should go serve and put in my time in. So I am the example. I started the Citizen Earned channel, the effort to be the example for any American on how to earn their citizenship. It's not the legal process of becoming a citizen, but even if you're born a citizen, right, to every day take agency and earn your citizenship or give something back, right? It's we the people. So this is the example of how I, the individual, becomes we, the people.
And this, just caveat, this is in every area of life. And somehow citizenship is just bequeathed upon us. But if you're part of a team, an organization, a church group, any group, right? They have requirements, right?
That's
This
right.
is what it means to be a member of this church. If you step outside of the line, then you're no longer a member. If you're going to be part of this team, this is what we do. And somehow citizenship is just, you could do whatever you want. And so I like what you're doing with Citizen Earned. Like, this is what it means. It's not just something that you just take for granted. It requires active engagement on your part.
Exactly. And so I was kind of predestined to only serve a term, because it's not in every citizen's wheelhouse to be career military, right? To do 20 or 30 or 40 years. That's not the example to set. So I'm getting out because this was the plan from the get-go, right? In the interim, what I learned was that it seems to me like the military is as soft as Americans, that they're suffering from as much, maybe more, of the woke agenda. And by the way, the only people that care about your emotional status when it comes to the natural order of things. Now, let's define real quick the natural order of things. The natural order of things is to be oppressed. It is populations of animals fighting over resources. And if a certain population has a leg up to take those resources away from other parts of the population, then they're going to do that. You see that in deer or elk or elephants or humans, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, oppression is the natural state of existence. So buffering, wokeism. Oh, the only people that care about your emotional state are the bureaucrats pushing the narrative. The enemy doesn't care how you feel. The enemy doesn't care whether your system is broken or if you think your system is broken. In fact, they want you to think that so that they can use it against you, right? And use it to divide the country. Leadership, realistically, probably doesn't care about your emotions. They only care to address your emotions enough to keep you effective, right? Your boss doesn't care about your emotions or rather, your boss only cares enough about your emotions to make sure that you continue to be a worker. If you are lucky and you have worked hard and you have solid principles, then maybe you have family that cares about your emotions. And if you have made good decisions, maybe you have friends that care about your emotions. And if you're a part of a larger group that is focused on emotional health, like a church, and I honestly can't think of any other groups out there, but maybe a friend group with like a similar interest,
Sure,
where people develop as a group or tribe, and then you develop enough trust to then be emotionally vulnerable with them. Those people care about your emotions, right? Because they have a direct link to you as a person. So the thing about this narrative that like gets me is it's a lie. And at the end of the day, if any of these leaders actually truly cared, they would be focusing on doing things that empower the individual to be more resilient against mental health issues. Let's just call it that, right?
So that I think about, this is something I've thought about the last couple. You remember in school learning about history and then learning about the Nazis and all these, I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's crazy. Lucky, glad we don't have to go through that kind of stuff again.
Right.
And since, the last 5 years, getting older, I start to think about history in cycles. And no matter how much you reason with somebody, there's a tendency when things get good, and you're talking about the softening of the kind of American mind and all this kind of stuff. It's because they don't need to learn how to change a tire, right? If so, and all the other things. You don't need resiliency if you don't need resiliency. So there's certain jobs and all that kind of stuff where people have to become resilient. But modern technology has allowed for your life to be outsourced, a lot of it at least. So to a certain extent, you're not going to tell those person to be emotionally resilient until they need to be emotionally resilient. And part of me thinks this is unavoidable. This cycle of, the hard times create hard men create good times, yada yada yada.
Right.
That cycle is, to a certain extent, is unavoidable. And so when you're talking about politicians, I don't know if anybody wants to hear it. Like, because truly what needs to be said, and they're kind of arguing about this in politics today, is, hey, we need to cut social programs because we can't afford them. But what does that mean for that politician? It means they won't get voted in again. Yeah. So all that means is they're going to get voted out, and the guy who's going to continue the social program is going to continue. So we will vote for our own demise until it actually happens.
Right.
What do you think about that? That's the natural progression.
That's a big can of worms. That's an awfully large can of worms. But what I will say is that I don't disagree with any part of it. To flesh it out and come up with a way to address it is a separate podcast. Okay. But essentially, it's what Citizen Earned is dedicated to doing. There's one thing that I disagree with on how you said it. Not with you. I think you misspoke, but we'll see here. People have the perception that they don't need to. Just because your car comes with run flat tires doesn't mean you don't need to know how to change a tire. You still need to. Just because the politician is feeding you everything that you need doesn't mean you don't need to read the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and your local laws, and be a responsible citizen. You do need to do that. Right?
But you're talking to like when you're talking to people, same with me, people who watch this channel, it resonates with 0.0001% of the population. What I'm talking about is that person completely asleep at the wheel, and you tell them, hey, look, listen up. This is what citizenship, and they're like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? And until when I say they don't need to, what I'm getting at is, in their experience, they've never seen this in their life. So they'll do it when they have that experience. And people learn this way all the time.
Too late.
Yes. So how do you wake, I guess what I'm trying to say is that's been humans forever.
Right.
It is, why the heck do I need to learn how to purify water or whatever the heck the skill is if I've never had to do it in my life?
Because of short-sightedness.
Of course.
And life hurts. So
yes,
there is no waking them up. There is no changing opinions. People's realities and their perceptions are informed by their experiences. So they have had a privileged, charmed life where they have never had to do any of those things. They're not going to. I think COVID was a good wake up for most people. There will be more of those instances happening like COVID, maybe not bio. Texas, that was during COVID, wasn't it? When Texas had that winter storm and lost the power grid, right? Those types of instances wake people up. And other people just go through life with an unbreakable mindset of cognitive dissonance. It's easier to keep my head in the sand and ignore things than it is to look up, identify something, because if I see it, then I'll have to do something about it. So
that's a majority, in my opinion, though.
Yeah.
The cognitive dissonance until pain gets bad enough.
That's right.
That's where I focus on. on this channel is like, how long until the pain? Because the pain, like where you and I probably agree is a politician, you were talking about a politician not caring about your emotions.
Yep.
They pretend, right? They pretend to care.
That's right.
And but there's a handout attached to that. So
right.
the man's attacking you or something. Here's how we're going to fix this. We're going to fix student loans, yada, yada, yada. We're not getting into what caused student loans to go up and all that, but
Right.
we're going to fix it, put a Band-Aid on it. I know it hurts. Here you go. That is the thing that I'm realizing is ending. The here you go handout stuff, because it's heads they lose, tails I win kind of thing, because they will cause inflation, or like the government can't print oil, can't print goods and services. At the end of the day, people don't want money, they want healthcare, or they want free college, or which is a good and service.
Or good water.
Yeah, or water, or whatever.
Michigan, right?
Yeah, they want something where the money buys them that thing.
Yeah,
and that's where I think the government's running out of.
And I mean, everything balances. Nothing is free. Everything costs something. Have you seen that meme where it shows the guy like he's like cut in half, and on the one side he's like super overweight, and on the other side he's like super well defined and like a bodybuilder.
Oh yeah.
And it says it hurts, or it hurts. Like it depends on what kind of hurt you want, right? If you want to be prepared, you're going to be exercising every day. You're going to be eating. You're going to be making a million tiny little decisions to distribute the hurt of what I've heard in the community referred to as an LAE, a life-altering event, over the course of days, weeks, months, and years. So when that event comes, it's not going to hurt. And the people that don't put in that preparation, we should do a podcast on being prepared, like the Boy Scout motto, right? Some people refer to it as preppers or whatever. But I love that mindset because it's a framework with which to define all of the systems of control in your life and systematically move to eliminate them, making you a more independent person. It's not about being prepared for an emergency. It's about understanding who has stolen your agency and getting it back. Does that make sense?
So well, let's wrap this up, because I have a small one in the room now. My wife has sent up the bad signal for me to, but we'll have to, you said preparedness, and what was the last thing you talked about? That's where I kind of want to talk next week.
It's essentially just preparedness.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And yeah, like I said, we're going to start doing this weekly. 1 second. And Matt, thanks again for coming on. 1 second.
You got it. You got your hands full, man.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on. And folks, we're going to try to do this, especially with like taking a story, maybe college loans or whatever the story happens to be, and then talking through it. Because I think Matt really thinks philosophically like I do. So thanks again, Matt, for coming on. See you guys next week. Peace.